Julia Ainsley joins us now from Washington, D.C. with more on her reporting on Abner's story. And Julia, just incredible that he spoke with you. I know you and your producers spent much time talking to him and his family. What made him want to come forward?
That's a good question. I mean, a lot of these reports have come through either the children talking through a government caseworker. That's what started this. Abner was one of 30 reports that my colleague Jacob Soboroff and I got 2 weeks ago. Or it's been from lawmakers or other lawyers going into these facilities and then telling us about them. But in this case, Abner felt that he could share his story, but we had to agree to things like anonymity, so we didn't share his full name, and we have his face blurred out there. There's a lot of tension here and a lot of anxiety in the immigrant community because they are so worried that if they go out and they basically out themselves as undocumented, that they would be targeted for deportation, particularly when they're complaining against conditions that the U.S. government put them through.
When you spoke with Abner, I know you said that he felt that he could help in some way. Was he very reluctant to do so? Did it sort of take a lot of talking with him in order for him to feel comfortable, or he just reached the point where he said, I have to do my part after speaking kind of to CBP beforehand?
Yeah, I don't know if it was necessarily he saw it as doing his part as much as it was he felt comfortable. So there were times along the way where we had to ensure that he felt comfortable. For example, the reason that interview is at the studio, the Chicago Bureau of NBC, is because if we went to his home with cameras, he was nervous. When we first saw him in the lobby, we had our producers with us. It was a bigger team, and they were worried that maybe this was a setup, that someone was part of law enforcement there to arrest him. I mean, that is the level of fear. So I think it was just surrounding him with comfort. It's hard to explain exactly what the American public thinks about immigration to an immigrant. We tried to emphasize that point over and over, that your story will resonate, your story will help tell others what happened there. But in the end, I think it was just as long as he felt comfortable, he felt better about going forward with it.
Julia, has the CBP responded to these claims, and sort of what have they said in reaction to his story?
They have. We got a statement yesterday, gave them over 24 hours to respond to these allegations, where they said that some of Abner's claims were inconsistent with the conditions in the Yuma facility around that time. He was there from late May through early June, those 11 days, and they were able to go back and look at what the conditions were reported at that time. But as far as the very specific allegations, they did not get into specifics. They just said that they would refer those to their Office of Professional Responsibility. I will say, though, because we were able to look at the reports from 30 other children around the same time, these are, in kind of formulaic government speak that's not as granular and detailed as Abner's story when he sat down with us. But what he says really is consistent with what these other children were saying. They talk about retaliation from guards, being afraid to ask for things, being very cold, overcrowded, and not having enough to eat or being able to take a shower. So there were a lot of consistencies in his story that do point to very real conditions that were going on at that time. But of course, Customs and Border Protection is pushing back, saying that they did the best they could to provide care despite the overcrowding. So we definitely want to present what they have to say as well.
Julia Ainsley in Washington, D.C., thank you.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.